The stewardess took off her stockings in front of all the passengers. The reason she did that, because the landing gear of the plane was malfunctioning. The plane had to make an emergency landing. She took off her stockings to avoid burning her skin in case the plane caught fire. Not only that, the stewardess asked the passengers to take off all their jewelry, but the plane only had enough fuel to fly for 20 minutes, and the fire department on the ground had just arrived at the runway. Even if they sprayed foam as fast as they could, it would be difficult to cover the 5,000-meter runway in 20 minutes. The fire chief immediately decided to spray foam only in the most critical areas. At the same time, hundreds of armed police and paramedics arrived. When the passengers learned that the plane was going to make an emergency landing, everyone started to get scared. Some yelled and screamed their heads off on the plane. Some wrote suicide notes. This is a real-life emergency landing that shocked the world. September 10th, 1998, a D-11 passenger plane from Shanghai Hangzhou to Beijing, with 137 passengers on board, took off as usual. But not long after takeoff, the captain realized something was wrong. The landing gear indicator, which should have been green, suddenly turned red. He asked the co-pilot to reopen the landing gear and retract it again. But when he finished, the light was still red. Realizing the seriousness of the problem, the captain immediately reported the situation to the command center and controlled the airplane to prepare to return to the flight. The passengers in the cabin started to get agitated when they saw that the plane was going back to the airport. Ground crews also found through observation, the airplane landing gear cannot open normally. This means that even if the plane were to return, it wouldn't be able to land properly. The plane has just taken off, but the flight attendants taught the passengers to do the anti-collision posture, because at this time the airplane landing gear failure is about to emergency landing. Only by teaching the passengers to do a good anti-collision posture, in order to effectively minimize the impact of emergency landing on the passengers brought about by injury. An old lady who had never been on an airplane before didn't understand the purpose of bending over. She sat up. The old man was so angry that he pushed her head down. He knew that landing alive was more important than anything else. Unexpectedly at this time, a factory manager also cannot stand it. He unbuckled his seatbelt and rushed over to the stewardess. He told the stewardess that he had 1 million yuan in cash in his suitcase. This money is all the wages of his workers. He hoped that, when the plane was about to land, she would throw his suitcase down and drag a kind person to deliver the money to his factory. And then he tried to kneel down to the stewardess. Apparently, this factory manager is ready to meet his death. The stewardess rushed to calm down the factory manager. Tell him not to think too much, because everything is in the hands of the captain and the flight attendants. Only back to the seat fastened seatbelt is the most safe. After the stewardesses, after a period of reassurance, the factory manager then put his heart down and returned to his seat. As the plane gradually ran out of fuel, the ground command center wants the captain to open the cabin door to see if it is possible to manually deploy the landing gear of the aircraft. But this is extremely dangerous, because they are flying in the sky. If you climb to the outside of the plane, if you are not careful, you will be blown down by the huge air currents. But for the safety of the 137 people on board, the co-pilot decided to open the cabin door and try it out. As the captain lowered the plane to an altitude of 400 meters, colleagues in the cabin tied the co-pilot to the safety rope. Everyone grabbed the safety rope with all their strength. The co-pilot descended to the outside. Unexpectedly, the cabin door was just opened. The co-pilot couldn't breathe because of the huge air pressure, but he was not afraid because of his responsibility. He climbed outside with great difficulty, but to his surprise, no matter how he tapped on the landing gear, it didn't move until he examined it carefully. The lockbox on the landing gear was broken. That means the landing gear is broken. After the ground command center was informed of this news, decided to ask the captain to make an emergency landing. A plane with 137 people on board had just taken off. The landing gear malfunctioned. For the safety of the passengers, ground command center had to decide to let the plane emergency landing. Although emergency landing is not dangerous, but the sparks from the plane's friction on the ground could explode the fuel tanks at any time. There's another way to make an emergency landing. That's a grass landing. But a grass landing is more dangerous, because the airplane's landing gear has lost its braking ability. If the airplane is forced to land on the grass, the impact of the airplane may cause the plane to disintegrate, resulting in the destruction of the plane and the death of the people. In order to make a safer landing, after some research, they decided to land the plane on the runway using a fire truck. They sprayed fireproof foam on the runway. This foam prevents friction fires from occurring on the runway. The captain knows that this is a big challenge for him, but the only thing he has to do now is to stay calm. As the flight attendants announced the passengers to prepare for the impact, the captain's eyes are firm as he pulls the airplane stick to make the plane land as smoothly as possible. At the same time, the fire trucks on the ground are also getting ready. Chase the airplane, ready to extinguish the plane at any time. As the plane gradually falls to the ground, the front cabin of the plane is rubbing against the ground. At the same time, flight attendants in the cabin also desperately shouted the instructions to bend down low. Luckily, because the runway was sprayed with fireproof foam, as the plane skidded to the largest foam on the runway, the plane was finally forced to stop. Firefighters began to cool down the airplane. They quickly minimized the friction temperature. Immediately after, flight attendants quickly directed the passengers to the cabin door. As the passengers slid out of the cabin one by one, the emergency landing was finally a success. But when all the passengers passengers had been evacuated. A flight attendant did not get off the plane, but rushed directly to the cockpit of the plane, seeing her husband, who was the captain of the plane, collapsed from exhaustion. The flight attendant rushed up and hugged her husband. The husband not only saved his own family, he saved more than 100 families.